November 10th, 1943, Rechlin Air Base, northern Germany. The early morning fog clings to the pine forest surrounding the Luftwaffe's top-secret testing ground. Frost dusts the edges of the runway, and a dull metallic hum fills the air as mechanics roll an unfamiliar shape into the light. The aircraft looks nothing like the elegant German fighters beside it. It's massive, round, thick through the fuselage, more like a flying barrel than a bird of prey. Its olive-green paint still carries faint traces of white American stars, hastily covered by black crosses. The men gathered around it laugh quietly. Der fliegende Milchflasche, one jokes, the flying milk bottle. Their laughter fades when Hauptmann Hans Werner Lersche steps forward, the Luftwaffe's most experienced test pilot, known for his calm precision, circles the American fighter in silence. He's flown nearly every German aircraft, from the Bf-109 to the secret Me-262 jet, but this thing looks alien. He runs his hand across the heavy riveted skin of the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt, feeling the thickness of its armor. He notes the radial engine, not the sleek inline kind Germany prefers, but a wide air-cooled monster. It's ugly, yes, but it looks like it could survive a beating. "Ready for flight?" he asks the ground crew. They exchange uncertain glances, then nod. Lersche climbs into the cockpit and pauses. Immediately, something feels different, spacious, uncluttered. Every switch and gauge seems deliberately placed. Throttle, prop pitch, fuel selector, all within perfect reach. The labels are clean, simple, logical. Even the colors make sense. Red for danger, blue for mixture, yellow for throttle. He exhales softly. Interesting. The canopy slides shut with a firm clunk. He primes the massive Pratt & Whitney R2800 engine and presses the starter. A deep growl erupts, then builds into a steady, thunderous rumble that shakes the hangar walls. As Lersche taxis down the runway, the Thunderbolt feels heavy but stable. The wide landing gear glides over the rough surface. No wobbling, no strain. He pushes the throttle forward. The radial roars like a bear awakened. The plane gathers speed, slowly at first, then with sudden, unstoppable momentum. At 150 kilometers per hour, the nose rises and the milk bottle leaves the earth. Lersche climbs steadily through the mist. At 3,000 meters, he opens the throttle. The turbo supercharger spools up behind him, a strange mechanical howl rising from the tail. The Thunderbolt surges forward, like a locomotive freed from his brakes. He grins. Mein Gott, this thing can move! At 7,000 meters, he begins his tests. Rolls, climbs, dives, everything feels solid. Not graceful, but stable, predictable. In a dive, it slices through the air with terrifying control. Even past 750 kilometers per hour, it shows no vibration, no sign of tearing apart. Most German fighters would already be on the edge of structural collapse. He banks the aircraft sharply and levels off. The controls are firm, but forgiving. It's the kind of machine that doesn't punish mistakes, it compensates for them. Back at Rechlin, as the Thunderbolt touches down smoothly on its wide, forgiving gear, Lersche can feel his earlier skepticism fading into respect. The laughter of his fellow pilots seems far away now. When he shuts down the engine, the airfield falls silent. He sits for a moment in the cockpit, staring at the color-coded levers and clean gauges. He realizes what this means. The Americans haven't built a fighter for aces. They've built one for anyone. He climbs out slowly, turning back to look at the massive radial nose glinting in the cold sunlight. It's not elegant, but it's genius. He knows what he's seen will not please Berlin. That night, the lights in Hans Lerche's office burned long after the hangars went dark. Outside, frost gathered on the windowsills, muffling the distant sounds of engines testing in the cold. Inside, Lurka sat hunched over his desk, a cup of black coffee gone cold beside a stack of papers, his official flight report on the American P-47 Thunderbolt. He wrote methodically, in his precise engineer's handwriting. Subject: Flight evaluation of captured U.S. Republic P-47C Thunderbolt. The pen scratched quietly across the page. He described the takeoff. Smooth, stable, effortless. He detailed the dive performance, unmatched. He noted the design of the cockpit, calling it the most intuitive I have encountered in any foreign aircraft. Every sentence contradicted what the Luftwaffe expected him to write. The American plane wasn't crude. It wasn't clumsy. It was practical. Every aspect of its design reflected a philosophy alien to German thinking. He stopped, tapped the pen on the desk, and stared out into the darkness beyond the glass. Somewhere out there, men were dying in fragile machines that demanded perfection. Pilots trained for years to master the Bf-109, an aircraft that could kill its own pilot as easily as it killed an enemy if handled wrong. But the Thunderbolt, a young American with 6 months of training, could climb in and fly it like second nature. He continued writing. This aircraft is designed for mass production and durability. It can operate from rough fields, endure extreme stress, and remain serviceable after heavy damage. Its systems favor simplicity and repetition over precision. He paused again, then underlined one line with deliberate force. It is an aircraft for armies, not for aces. The phrase lingered in his mind. Germany built fighters like it built its philosophy, around the idea of the exceptional man, the ace, the hero. Every machine was a finely tuned instrument meant to extend his skill. But the Americans had built something entirely different, an aircraft that made skill less essential. It was a machine designed for a nation that could afford to lose men, but not time. Lurka wrote deep into the night, recording every detail, every observation that the High Command didn't want to see. When he finally signed his name at the bottom, Hauptmann Hans-Herner Lurka, Testflieger Rechlin, he hesitated for a moment before sealing the envelope. He knew this report would cause trouble. The next morning, a courier carried the brown envelope marked Geheime Kommandosache, Secret Command Matter, to Berlin. Weeks passed. Then one afternoon, a reply arrived from the Luftwaffe's technical office. Assessment received, no further testing required, conclude analysis. No questions, no requests for follow-up flights, just silence. Lurka folded the letter slowly, the corners trembling between his fingers. His evaluation, his warning, had been buried. He'd told them what they didn't want to hear, that German brilliance could not outlast American industry. He stood by the hangar door that evening, watching a row of Bf-109s taxi past in the dying light. Sleek, sharp, and deadly, but fragile. Each one a symbol of a nation still obsessed with elegance, still convinced that perfection could win a war of attrition. And as the engines faded into the distance, Lurka murmured under his breath, "They're fighting the wrong kind of war." By the spring of 1944, Hans Lurka's warning had already begun to materialize, not in laboratories or test fields, but in the skies over Europe. The P-47 Thunderbolts he'd once studied in isolation now filled the air in terrifying numbers. From his post at Rechlin, Lurka heard the reports daily. Massive formations of American fighters escorting bomber streams that darkened the sky. Dozens of Thunderbolts one week, hundreds the next. They came like a tide, steady, relentless, and impossible to hold back. The Luftwaffe scrambled everything it had. Squadrons of Bf-109s and FW-190s took off to intercept the bombers, and every time the Thunderbolts were there waiting. Lurka stood on the tarmac one afternoon as a damaged FW-190 limped home, smoke trailing from its engine. The pilot, pale and shaking, stumbled from the cockpit. "They don't break," he muttered. "You hit them, and they just keep flying." The ground crew nodded grimly. They'd heard the same thing again and again. P-47s with holes the size of a man's fist would still make it back to base. Their radial engines could take punishment that would have destroyed a Daimler-Benz inline. It was everything Lurka had seen firsthand. Durability over elegance. Practicality over precision. From intercepted radio chatter and intelligence reports, Lurka learned how the Americans operated. Squadrons rotated constantly, with aircraft serviced by teams of mechanics working in shifts around the clock. Damaged planes were repaired in hours, not days. Pilots were replaced as quickly as engines. The system was impersonal, almost mechanical, but it worked. Meanwhile, at Rechlin, German engineers were still perfecting prototypes, faster, sleeker, more advanced. But every breakthrough demanded rarer materials, more intricate parts, and more specialized labor. Lurka attended a demonstration of the new Messerschmitt Me 262 jet fighter that summer. The aircraft was breathtaking, a machine decades ahead of its time. But when the engines failed after only 10 hours of flight time, the test director shrugged. "We'll improve it in the next batch." Lurka said nothing, but the thought burned in his mind. There wouldn't be a next batch. Germany no longer had the fuel, the time, or the stability to fight an industrial war of refinement. And still the Thunderbolts kept coming. By mid-1944, U.S. 8th Air Force operations over Germany reached their peak. Every morning, the skies filled with the thunder of hundreds of Wright R-2800 engines. The Americans called it Thunderbolt weather. On radar screens, the dots looked endless. Lurka would later write in his notes, "We built perfection, they built endurance. We built for mastery, they built for repetition." He understood now that the war was no longer about who flew the better machine, but who could keep their machines in the air the longest. And in that kind of war, the Thunderbolt was the ultimate weapon, not because it was beautiful, but because it survived. As the sun set over Rechlin one evening, Lurka walked past the hangars where the captured P-47 Beetle still sat, its American insignia painted over with Luftwaffe markings. Dust had gathered on its wings. The aircraft had served its purpose, and its lesson had been ignored. He paused beside it, running a gloved hand along the metal skin. You were never meant to win duels, only wars. Far above him, faint contrails streaked across the twilight, endless white lines heading eastward. Back in his Rechlin office, Hans Lurch pored over reports from the front lines. Each one confirmed what he had first discovered that November morning. German pilots, no matter how skilled, were being ground down by sheer numbers, operational endurance, and the relentless logistics of the American war machine. He flipped through diagrams of the P-47 Thunderbolt. The robust landing gear, the massive R-2800 engine, the color-coded instrument panel, and the thoughtfully designed cockpit. Each element was intentional, designed not for aesthetic perfection, but for operational reliability. Not elegance, Lurch muttered to himself, but survival. Not peak performance, but availability. He compared it silently to the Bf-109, sitting in its hangar just across the airfield. Sleek, precise, deadly, but demanding. The smallest error, the slightest mechanical fault, could be catastrophic. And with fuel and parts shortages worsening, the Luftwaffe's highly trained pilots were becoming increasingly rare. Lurch began drafting a conceptual note, a memo to the technical office, not just about the P-47, but about design philosophy itself. Germany builds fighters for aces, he wrote. America builds fighters for armies. He outlined the consequences. German fighters could outperform the P-47 in a dogfight, in perfect conditions, with expert pilots and flawless maintenance. But how often could those conditions be met? Not often. The Americans, on the other hand, could operate a Thunderbolt almost anywhere by nearly anyone under almost any conditions. Combat losses could be replaced quickly. Pilots could be trained efficiently. Damaged aircraft returned to service repeatedly. Operational availability multiplied their effectiveness far beyond raw performance metrics. Lurch paused, realizing the stark truth. Total war is a war of endurance, not elegance. He wrote it plainly in his memo. The P-47 represents a fundamentally different approach to aircraft design, one that prioritizes operational reliability, ease of maintenance, and pilot survivability. This philosophy allows a force to sustain itself under attrition conditions that would destroy even technically superior aircraft. Our current focus on peak performance and pilot skill is unsustainable in prolonged conflict. His memo was meticulous, detailed, and damning in its subtlety. Lurch documented the P-47's advantages: long-range capability, rugged construction, forgiving handling, intuitive systems, and robust engine performance. He included recommendations. Consider industrially scalable designs, simplify maintenance, incorporate pilot-friendly controls, and prioritize aircraft availability over marginal performance gains. He folded the pages and sent them up the chain of command. Weeks later, he received a curt reply. Report acknowledged. No changes required. German engineering remains superior. Continue testing. Lurch stared at the note for a long moment. The truth had been dismissed. Bureaucratic pride, ideology, and stubborn belief in German technical supremacy outweighed operational reality. He shook his head. He said, "History will judge." Outside, the distant thunder of American fighters echoed faintly across the forested landscape. Each roar reminded him of what he had seen: the P-47 climbing, diving, surviving, and returning again and again. The flying milk bottle had become a symbol of industrial warfare itself, relentless, practical, and devastatingly effective. For Lurch, the lesson was clear. In total war, numbers, endurance, and operational design trumped individual brilliance. And in the skies over Europe, that lesson was being written in fire and smoke, one Thunderbolt at a time. By late 1944, the reality that Hans Lurch had foreseen was impossible to ignore. The skies over Germany were dominated by the relentless roar of American engines. Hundreds of P-47 Thunderbolts escorted bomber formations deep into the Reich, their radial engines producing a deafening, unbroken thunder the German pilots began to fear. Reports streamed in to Rechlin and higher command. Damaged P-47s limped home only to be repaired and returned to the front within days. Their robust construction and reliable systems allowed pilots to survive missions that would have destroyed lesser aircraft. Lurch observed, notebook in hand, as Luftwaffe pilots recounted encounters. One young Bf-109 pilot, visibly exhausted, described his frustration. "We hit them hard, engines smoking, wings torn, yet they flew, again and again." He made no comments. He had seen it before. The problem was systemic. German factories, now crippled by Allied bombing raids, could not maintain production. Skilled workers had been drafted or killed, and replacement labor lacked the precision needed for complex aircraft. Even the Me-262, the jet fighter that had promised to reclaim the skies, suffered setbacks due to material shortages and untrained assembly crews. Meanwhile, American production soared. Over 15,000 P-47s had been built by the end of 1944, each machine meeting strict tolerances and leaving factories ready for the field. At peak production, one Thunderbolt rolled off the assembly line every hour. Operational availability remained high, and pilot losses were easily replaced. Lurk's own flight logs became a grim record of insight ignored. He had flown captured P-51 Mustangs, Spitfires, and even Soviet aircraft, and each evaluation reinforced the same truth. Allied aircraft prioritized operational reliability and survivability over pure performance. Their design philosophy assumed average pilots and field maintenance, not perfection. He often returned in thought to the P-47 Beetle, the first captured aircraft he had flown at Rechlin. The cockpit spaciousness, the intuitive controls, the engine that never faltered. It all made sense now. Each design choice was part of a larger strategy: sustain operations, reduce attrition, and outlast the opponent. Even Zirkus Reserrius, the Luftwaffe demonstration unit tasked with flying captured Allied aircraft to educate German pilots, could not alter the outcome. German engineers watched, learned, and yet continued building machines optimized for the elite, ignoring the practical wisdom the Thunderbolt offered. By the fall, it was clear Germany had lost the operational war, even before all the machines had fallen. Fighter performance alone could not counter the Americans' ability to keep hundreds of planes flying at a time, flown by adequately trained pilots, supported by a vast industrial network. Lurk recorded his final thoughts in his journal. "We built perfection for a few. They built endurance for many. And in the calculus of total war, endurance triumphs." Outside, the sound of distant engines carried across the broken countryside. The thunder of the Thunderbolts had become a constant, unavoidable presence, a reminder that the philosophy of design, not just skill or speed, shaped the fate of nations. The war finally ended in May 1945, and Hans Lurche survived, remarkably unscathed, despite having flown over 120 different aircraft types, many captured, many unfamiliar, and many under dangerous conditions. He had seen firsthand the fragility of German engineering under total war and the resilience of American design philosophy. After the surrender, Allied technical intelligence officers interrogated him. They were fascinated by his detailed reports and the precision of his observations. For the first time, Lurch explained fully what he had understood at Rechlin all those months ago. Quote, "The P-47 was not the fastest, nor the most maneuverable. It was not elegant, but it kept flying. It could be repaired quickly. Pilots could operate it safely after minimal training. Every design decision prioritized sustained operations over individual performance." The Americans listened intently, impressed by his clarity. One officer remarked, "That's an unusual assessment for a German pilot." Lurch nodded soberly. "It is not unusual, it is true. Your pilots weren't necessarily better than ours. Your aircraft weren't necessarily faster than ours, but you could field more planes, keep them in the air, and replace them faster than we ever could." He reflected on his time at Rechlin, on that first flight in the flying milk bottle, and on the countless hours writing reports that were ignored. He realized that German ideology, the obsession with elite pilots and peak performance, had blinded decision makers to practical realities. Even after the war, Lurch's reports became reference points for understanding industrial warfare. The lessons of the Thunderbolt were clear. In prolonged conflict, operational reliability, durability, and mass production outweigh individual excellence. Looking back, Lurch often thought about the contrast: the delicate, high-strung Bf-109, beautiful and precise, versus the broad, powerful P-47, functional and forgiving. In total war, the latter had the advantage. He wrote in his memoir, Luftwaffe Test Pilot Flying Captured Allied Aircraft of World War II, quote, "The P-47 was never intended to win a dogfight against a single opponent. It was designed to win the war. And in that design, the Americans anticipated the attrition that we could not. Reliability, operational availability, and simplicity mattered more than the perfection we sought in our fighters. That is why, in the end, they could sustain the fight longer than we ever could." The lesson was timeless. Lurch understood that wars are not won by singular acts of brilliance alone, but by systems capable of enduring strain and keeping the fight alive. The Thunderbolt, once mocked, had revealed the truth. In a conflict of machines, endurance and practicality triumph over beauty and precision. Hans Lurch lived to tell the story, a testament to the wisdom that Germany had ignored and the design philosophy that had helped the Allies dominate the skies. The flying milk bottle had become, in his eyes, one of the most important aircraft of the war, not for what it could do in a dogfight, but for what it represented in total warfare.